Right, let's talk about 5 more mistakes that especially technical candidates do while answering primarily behavioral questions. The first topic here would be talking about customer and customer obsession, customer centricity, if you want. The problem here is oftentimes you as a technical candidate consider a scenario where with a difficult customer, one was where your system crashed and your customer was eventually hard on you. When in fact this is not an example of customer obsession or customer centricity, but rather an example of customer support. Like it's only just normal that if you've done a mistake that you fix it. And you shouldn't be surprised if your customer gets angry on you because of this. Now, what's a good approach about this? Well, you should, raise the level here a little bit. So you should think about the time, for example, when the customer was too demanding in a situation and you eventually found the right balance, that sweet spot, to balance the needs of the customer with the needs of the business, for example. So the idea is that the customer must be demanding primarily. It's not you the one, trying to please the customer because you've done a mistake. So this is the first one. The second one I want to talk about here, in particular for technical roles, is over templating your answers. Now, so there is this advice on various job interviewing websites that you must use the STAR method. Now, but think about it. Why do they ask you to use the STAR method? They ask you because they want to have a framework into which they can score you on these answers. Is that framework going to be to your advantage? Well, it's not as you would resolve a mathematics equation, like if you fill in all the steps, all the elements of a STAR answer, then you give the perfect answer, and it's not by far the case. A job interview, especially with high-performing companies, is often judged by what the interviewer thinks about you, not about what your answers are. So, in other words, if you manage to have an engaging conversation and fill in all the steps in the STAR format, it will be exponentially better than if you just filled in the STAR answers. And what happens here is this is oftentimes linked with an probable error in the strategy that you employ to prepare for presumably the on-site interview, but also for this telephone screening round. The error being that you miscalculated the time it takes you to properly communicate your answers to questions, whereas you spent all your time brainstorming, what should I say here, not how I say it. So over templating your answers should be something that you really want to be careful at. And for it also goes for other types of roles, for sales roles, for example, that cannot really convey this message quickly enough, right? So role playing and getting used to communicating the idea that you want to transmit is very important during an interview. Number three mistake in a job interview. It's often that I hear the following feedback: Dan, but it was a very nice experience. They've been nice to me and I've been very nice to them, and then I failed. Right? Why would this be the case? Like, if an interviewer is nice to them and you are nice to them, if they're nice to you and you're nice to them, why would they fail you? Well, it's simply because, by being nice to you, they know, especially technical people, will open up. They will get more personal, and they will find what you don't want to tell them about the job interview. This is oftentimes, if they screen you this way, it's not with a bad intention. But it does happen that, especially if there are, 100 candidates for the role, the interviewers must get really picky at the information that they hear, and they really must have to find weaknesses, so unless they bias you somehow, either they make you feel very comfortable, either the other option, which is not so comfortable, to spot some changes in behavior. So when going into an interview, don't expect the interviewers to be unbiased. right? There's often, this trend nowadays expect that the employers must be unbiased about the people that they choose. Yes, about the people that they choose, but to properly screen someone, you have to be extremely biased. So simply put, realize that an interview is about going to extremes at some points, and try, to stay focused and focus on your strengths and giving answers within a cautiously optimistic lens perspective. Number 4, it's often that it's not only with technical candidates, but it's I often notice this, that there are some very qualified candidates, even overqualified for certain roles, and they feel like, they feel this need to communicate, to talk fast, to speak fast, to, whenever you throw a question at them, they immediately answer, and with what they think, the faster they answer, it will be the perfect answer. And you'd probably be right 85% of the time or so, but the problem is with the other 15% of the time, when you simply, instead of listening to learn what they're asking you, what they're really asking you, you're listening to respond. And the problem with this approach is the more reactive you are in a job interview, the less likely you are to properly understand what they're really asking you. And imagine yourself 85% of the time getting it right, and 15% of the time, like, what's that, 3 questions out of 20 to completely miss out. That's sufficient not to qualify, not to get a job offer, no matter how technically skilled you are. So here you might, want to consider this one carefully, and I will repeat this one more time. Listen to learn. Do not listen to answer a question. And I even went as far to recommend some people to introduce a couple of seconds of intentional delay within the conversation. So until you feel like, yes, this is exactly what I'm going to say, and I'm really confident this is the best story that I want to use, and I properly understood the question that they were asking me to its full extent. So you might also consider this one. And last but not least, it's another scenario that I wanted to touch upon, that is of tailoring your answer to the person that you're speaking with. For example, if I would talk to an HR person about a time when I had to negotiate something in my business, and I would start like this. When I was part of a startup, I was a technical director there. We had an overzealous CEO who was, happy to take on new projects, even though he was never right on the timelines. He never cared about the timelines. He just got in work, and this actually introduced a lot of problems in our on actually gaining our customers' trust. And I eventually negotiated with our CEO, and we eventually fixed the problem. The challenge here is that, first of all, you're speaking to an HR person about your overzealous CEO. That's, it doesn't go as well. It might easily come across the wrong way, like you're really putting the blame on that guy in a job interview. Whereas if you would be talking with a technical person, with another, software architect or a primarily technical person, and you say overzealous CEO, and you live in the UK where, is a different culture, yes, that might come across the right way, even, as a great example. My point here is that there's no such thing as a perfect answer to any interviewer, or, there is to a certain extent, but ideally you should always tailor your delivery to the person that you're interviewing with. And that's why, on another note, I also advise you to prepare 2 versions for Tell Me About Yourself. Simply because, there are topics that are worthwhile emphasizing more with some people and less with others. So have that emotional intelligence, if you want a fancy word, in a job interview, because it does actually pay off.